Welcome to the Purpose-Based Retirement with certified financial planner Casey Weade. Casey is the president of Howard Bailey Financial.
Whatever risk you face during your retirement years, we've got a plan.
A published author and radio host.
It's not how much we make during the good times, it's how much we keep during those really bad times.
His advocacy for retirees and pre-retirees has made him a sought-after speaker and trusted financial leader.
And putting a real plan together.
This is the Purpose-Based Retirement.
Good to see you again. I am Lee Kelso here with Casey Weade, certified financial planner and the president of Howard Bailey Financial. On the program today, we're going to take a look at the average expenditures of American families and what that can tell us about being ready for our retirement. That's coming up a little bit later in the program. First, we're going to start with some of the things that all retirees seem to want. And I think you're going to find this interesting because Casey meets with literally hundreds of families every year, and the Howard Bailey team even more. And I know that you've identified a number of things, 6 things in particular, that every retiree wants. So I'm going to walk through these and we'll get some input on exactly what all these mean and how you can help in that regard. First and foremost is a steady stream of income. That's critical.
Right. Every retiree, once they get to retirement, they want income, right? And I think sometimes we have to walk ourselves through that in order for you to realize that that's really what the goal is. Because first you think it's growth. You think it's about growth on your portfolio at that time in your life, but it's not. It's now about return of your money rather than the return on your money. And growth and income are 2 very different goals. And once we figure that out, then we can put an income strategy together. But most of the people that I sit down with when they first walk in the door, even if they're in retirement, they don't have an income strategy. And in this low interest rate environment that we're in today, not having a strategy is like being up a creek without a paddle. We have to be prepared. We have to have a structured income strategy. And it's been proven through statistical analysis that that old 4% withdrawal rule, getting to retirement, setting a goal return of 5-6% a year, and pulling a set percentage out of our portfolio is the worst possible strategy with the highest failure rate that we could have once we get to retirement. It's no longer about that. It's about having a dedicated asset strategy. That's what the American College has stated is the most proficient income strategy for retirement, and that likens itself to a purpose-based retirement where we identify the specific purposes for all those assets, including your income, so that you can spend with confidence.
You know, one of the things that everybody wants today, even more so in retirement though, is lower taxes.
Yeah, everybody wants to pay lower taxes, right? And sometimes that might get you in trouble when you're focusing on lower taxes today and not focusing on the long term. And it's not just your fault. Many times that's your CPA's goal, looking back throughout the last 12 months and saying, oh, well, how can we save some money on our taxes this year? Maybe we should buy a new truck. Maybe we can save 20 cents by spending $1. You know, those types of strategies might put your advisor in a better light where your advisor or your CPA advisor has now lowered your taxes for that year, but you're not looking at the long term. Once you get to retirement, taxes could be dramatically different than they are today. We're in one of the lowest tax rate environments in history, and we're already starting to see some of the increases that have been put in place, such as some of those taxes that have come from the Affordable Health Care Act at the same time. So we have to be prepared for higher taxes in the future, and sometimes that means short-term pain for long-term gain. I know I'm the bad guy quite often every single year when my clients sit down to do the taxes, not because we haven't sheltered the assets they don't need from taxation, but because we've maybe pushed them into a position where they need to pay some taxes today. Maybe that's taking advantage of long-term capital gains rates today, maybe paying a portion of those taxes at 0%, a portion at 15%, accelerating some of those IRAs income into this year, doing a Roth conversion potentially. And what's that result in? That results in that short-term pain today, but once you get to retirement, you're looking at lower taxable income for years and years, maybe even avoiding paying Social Security taxes altogether. And that's something that's so often overlooked is they say, well, you're going to be in a lower tax rate environment once you retire. You're making $80,000 a year. Well, in retirement, you're going to be making what? You're going to make 30 or 50,000. Well, you're still in the 15% tax bracket, and then you're not paying attention to that extra Social Security income. Well, that Social Security income, if you're paying taxes on it with $1 extra, I could show you how that results in a tax torpedo, meaning you could potentially be in a 30 or 40% tax bracket on that Social Security income. Let's focus on putting you in a better position in the future rather than focusing so much on today. But us as Americans, sometimes it's hard to do.
It is true. And we're living right now in a very, very low inflation environment, but all of us approaching retirement, we remember those Jimmy Carter years, and we're worried about inflation.
Right, and that is something we need to be concerned about, but sometimes we make it the sole focus of our goals. And that's maybe why, because we see on TV, we see commodities, we need to buy gold, we need to put everything at risk in order to keep up with inflation because interest rates are so low. Well, that's not necessarily the case. You need to first focus on what you can control during your retirement years. Then we can play some defense against these other things. Take, for instance, gold. That's not a safe place to put money, but it's not a bad place to put it. We just can't afford to put all of the assets you need for retirement in one place, or all at risk for that matter. One, you have to be focused on the asset dedication strategy we talked about previously. What are the things that we can control? One, we can control what happens in case of an emergency. What if you have a problem with your car and it breaks down? We can have a plan for that. The grandkids need some money. We can have a plan for that. Number two, we can set aside assets for income to create a guaranteed income that'll last the rest of your life, regardless of how long you live and regardless of what happens in the stock market. And then we can set assets aside to help for healthcare costs in the future as well. Then we can play some defense against inflation, and we can focus on building a portfolio of dividend growth, maybe exposure to commodities, precious metals, energy-related investment assets, those types of things that have been the best inflation hedges over the last 100 years. Take a diversified approach, but control those things you can first, then come back to it.
Casey, you just mentioned healthcare, and of course that's something everybody has to be concerned about in retirement, affording my health care.
Right. When it comes to affordable health care, this is something that we typically just push off because we don't want to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah, this is one of those uncomfortable conversations that's much like the conversational, what's going to happen with your life savings once you pass away. But we have to have this conversation. I had a single lady that I sat down with here recently, and I said, well, what's your strategy? We have to ask these questions to get to know our clients. Do you have any life insurance? Do you have any long-term care insurance? She said, no, I don't have any long-term care insurance. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I kind of do. It's with Smith & Wesson. And I said, oh, okay, so you have that type of long-term care insurance. And my dad often said the same thing. He'd say, well, that's only going to happen if I can't find the gun. Well, she realized after that conversation she may not be able to find the gun if that does happen, and her kids aren't willing to pull the trigger. And she had enough assets that we could set things aside to start planning for that today, so she never had to worry about being that type of burden. We just have to work on it and have a comprehensive strategy.
We have two more points we want to get through quickly here. One of them is transparency. You want to know exactly what's going on, right?
Yeah, trust is great, and you may trust your financial advisor, but what's better is when you have complete transparency, and sometimes that takes getting a second opinion and having someone break open what you currently have, whether those are mutual funds or annuities, how much are you actually paying in fees and expenses, and are you paying any unnecessary taxes, taking any unnecessary risk?
The last one is one that maybe not everybody is concerned about, but many people are, and that is leaving a legacy.
Right. Some people want to leave a legacy, and we too often wait until it's too late to start focusing on maximizing that legacy, which sometimes means not just using the assets you have today to leverage them, the assets you're never going to use, but also focusing on that basic estate plan and that tax strategy. And there's so much more that we can do if we start when you're 60 years old to start planning on that legacy rather than waiting until you're 80 or 85 years old when all of a sudden you know how much you're going to leave behind. And it doesn't mean giving up control of that money. It just means realizing that someday that day is going to come, and we need to start working towards a plan that's going to work for you no matter how much you leave behind or how much you want to leave behind for the next generation.
You know, there's that old saying that a goal without a plan is just a wish. And after we ran through that wish list, if you find yourself in that wish category instead of the plan category, I hope you'll take advantage of our special offer. For the next 10 people who call right now, 482-9559, we're going to offer a complimentary review of your entire financial and retirement plan. It's an opportunity to get an education about your money so that you can make the very best decisions for yourself moving forward. So for the next 10 callers, Casey and the team are willing to make time on their calendars, visit with you, and give you your very own purpose-based retirement. Well, let's jump over to our question of the day. What are the average annual expenditures of those between the ages of 45 and 54? Some choices are on your screen, and Casey has the answer when we come back.
Hi, I'm a certified financial planner practitioner. There is no silver bullet for your retirement, but that is what financial advisors are selling you every day. The fact is that in the constantly changing world we're in today, it's more complex than ever. But if you can establish a clear plan of action with well-defined goals, you've taken the first step. At Howard Bailey Financial, our goal is to lend you the confidence you are on the path towards the financial independence you deserve. If you'd like help designing your personalized retirement strategy, give us a call today.
You need a plan for retirement to create the lifestyle you've always dreamed of. The first step is to tune into the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with your hosts Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson every Saturday morning at 11 and Sunday afternoon at 1 on 1190 WOWO and 107.5 FM.
And welcome back. If you're just joining us a moment ago, we asked the question of the day: what is the average annual expenditure of those between the ages of 45 and 54? Is it as low as $32,000 or as high as $65,000? Casey, what's the answer?
Well, Lee, the answer is A, $58,708 a year. Those are the average expenditures of those individuals that are between the ages of 45 and 54, preparing themselves for retirement. And I didn't tell you exactly what that average expenditure was so that you could compare how much you're spending to everybody else and know if you're spending too much or not enough. I wanted you to know that so that you could compare that to what a 75-year-old is actually spending. We could actually emphasize the reaction of inflation over a retirement period. The average 54-year-old spending around $58,000 a year, while the average 75-year-old spends just a little over $30,000 on an annual basis. So you have to ask yourself, well, where's inflation? Well, there is still inflation going on there. However, expenses are going to be dropping during your retirement years as well. My professor in college often called this your go-go years, your slow-go years, and your no-go years. When you're 55 years old, going to 75, that's 20 years. A 3% inflation rate means that over that 20-year period, you should spend about 60% more than you do when you're actually just on the onset of retirement. But once we factor in the way that you actually spend those dollars, we see a very different picture. So this is where you have to ask yourself, is your financial advisor pressuring you into higher risk investments, high yield bonds, higher yielding stocks in order to best provide for your interest during retirement? Or are those the only vehicles that that advisor knows how to use to generate a higher level of yield? Now, once you define what that income is that you need today, once you step into retirement, and you have also projected what you'll need into the future, then you can start putting together a real plan. And I want to walk you through what a retirement strategy looks like, a purpose-based retirement that we did for someone not all that long ago. And we're going to call this couple Dick and Jane to protect their identity. Dick and Jane are age 61 and 60. And they're planning on retiring in the next 2 years. And their need is they'll need an additional $2,000 a month after pension and Social Security. So they'll have about $24,000 a year that they will need from their retirement nest egg that totals $925,000. And that goal is not going to be too hard to hit, right? We only need to generate around, say, 3% a year in order to generate that $24,000 a year that they're trying to get to after tax. But we have some other goals that Dick and Jane have, maybe much like yourself. Dick and Jane, number one, they wanted a comprehensive plan that they could understand. They had a 401k, they had a couple different annuities and some mutual funds out there. They had a lot of different investments, but they never really understood how all those different things that they currently have are going to accomplish some of their more specific goals. One is that income gap. Where was that money going to come from, and how are they going to be able to distribute it in the most tax efficient manner possible so they could spend with confidence during their retirement years? Number two, assurance that they would never be a burden was a big issue for them because they were currently taking care of one of their sets of parents in the nursing home, and they were also trying to balance between nursing home and their own life and the finances of the family, and also preservation of their legacy to their children. So what were those specific purposes if we break those out? One, making sure funds were available for emergencies. 2, creating stable income regardless of market volatility. 3, growth in case of inflation. 4, protection from potential healthcare expenses. And 5, tax reduction for their heirs. So let's start with number 1. How did we fund that emergency fund? How do you determine how much is enough? Well, their expenses in total were about $5,500 a month, and those were the numbers that we were trying to get to. So they spend about $5,500 a month. We typically want to keep somewhere between 6 and 12 months of our expenses in a liquid safe place that we can get to at a moment's notice. So multiply that number by 12. We decided we wanted to be on the long end of that, so we'd have about $66,000 set aside in their emergency fund and savings and checking, etc. Then we needed to set aside funds for income, and they needed a pension to supplement their existing pension so that they wouldn't have to dig into their investments during those bad years. We needed $2,000 a month. We set aside $450,000 to guarantee $25,000 a year for the rest of both their lives, regardless of what happens in the stock market and regardless of how long that they live. Then we needed to set assets aside for inflation protection. So we carved out a portion of the portfolio to generate a total return, meaning not just price appreciation, but more importantly, income at the same time. We wanted to see a portfolio that had a yield dividend in that 4% plus range. So especially in this market that seems overvalued, even if we experience a slow growth market, we'll still be making at least 4% a year in total return. And total return can come from a number of places, whether that's ETFs or commodities, energy, bonds, real estate investment, Treasury inflation protection securities. We want to create a diversified way, not just bonds, in order to generate that investment income. Then we had everything that was left. We needed to put together an estate plan. That meant first taking care of some of those basic estate planning documents, their wills, power of attorneys. They even needed a trust, and also taking care of that I don't want to be a burden concern that they had, and that meant purchasing a small long-term care policy. And for them, they didn't want the Cadillac of policies. They didn't mind spending a little bit of their own money, so we just bought a small enough policy to ensure they would never be a burden. And then we had the legacy, everything that was left over after we took care of their emergency money, their income money, their inflation dollars. Now the only thing that we had left, the reason that they would spend money, was actually to leave behind as a legacy. So we were left with about $200,000. We set that aside to guarantee $600,000 tax-free to the next generation. So breaking that down from piece by piece, what did we have? It seemed a little overwhelming, but we really only had 4 purposes. 1 for liquidity, 2 for income, 3 for inflation protection, and 4 as the estate plan. So $50,000 for emergencies, income of $450,000, generating $25,000 for life. Inflation protection, set aside $250,000, generating about $1,000 extra a month should they ever need it in income. And the remaining assets, passing on $600,000 tax-free and taking care of health care, recreating any of the dollars they planned on spending while they were still here on Earth.
Casey, that's one of the reasons I think it's so important that people work with a professional, because even though that plan may sound fairly simple to you, for a lot of folks it's just overwhelming. And that's why I hope you'll be one of the next 10 people to pick up the phone and call 482-9559. The next 10 callers will receive a complimentary financial review. You'll sit down with a Howard Bailey staff member and walk through exactly what's going on, your needs, your plans, and take a look at exactly what's happening in your financial world so that you get the education you can and make the best decisions for yourself moving forward. The number is 482-9559. I hope you'll be one of the next 10 callers to receive that complimentary financial review. And we're going to take questions from viewers when we come back.
Hi, I'm a certified financial planner professional. I believe the bar for entry into the financial industry is far too low. You and your hard-earned money deserve better. With a CFP professional, you can have the confidence you are working with an advisor who has met not only rigorous education and experience requirements, but also is held to the highest ethical and professional standards in the industry, resulting in better methods that will address the financial challenges you will face in retirement. If you'd like to see how a CFP professional can serve you, give us a call.
You need a plan for retirement to create the lifestyle you've always dreamed of. The first step is to tune into the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with your hosts, Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson, every Saturday morning at 11 and Sunday afternoon at 1 on 1190 WOWO and 107.5 FM.
You know, each week Casey gets questions from viewers of the program. We pick out a few of those and invite those folks to give us a call here at the program so we can ask those questions and share the answers with you. First up is Eric from Fort Wayne. Eric, what's your question?
My wife and I have built up a substantial portfolio over the years. We are pretty conservative and don't spend a lot of money. Currently, this money is in a traditional IRA, and we are converting some money each year to a Roth IRA. Is this the best strategy for us to pass assets on to our children?
Well, Eric, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad strategy. It could be a very good strategy. It just depends on where you're actually at in your life. And this can be sometimes something that you want to do a combination of maybe a couple of different things. Let me give you an example. We've got a couple that we worked with that were in their early 60s, and they had a pretty substantial retirement portfolio. They had a big enough portfolio where we could carve out funds for emergencies, to guarantee all the income they'd need for the rest of their life, to take care of potential health care costs in the future, and we were still left over with around $300,000. Now that $300,000, they knew 100% that they were never going to need. So we put that in an account that would guarantee $900,000 tax-free for their heirs, whether they passed away today or 30 years from now, so that they knew that they could spend the rest of their portfolio and still leave behind $900,000, and they used $300,000 in order to accomplish that goal, and they did it on a guaranteed basis. Now that wasn't all that we did though. That was just $300,000 that they knew that they could give up control over. They still had other room in their tax bracket that we could use a little bit each year, be it $10,000, $15,000, depending on where the market was, depending on where tax brackets are, that we could convert to Roth IRA and allow them to maintain their tax bracket. That's the most important thing that you want to focus on as you're doing these Roth conversions, which might be a really good thing, especially if you're in the 15%, maybe even the 25% bracket, because the chances of your children being in a higher tax bracket, the chances of you being in a higher tax bracket in the future are pretty darn high. So good strategy. I would want to look at the big picture though and see if there's some room to potentially take some of those dollars and leverage them to multiply the value that's being passed on to the next generation.
All right, thanks, Eric. From Fort Wayne, we roll on to Roanoke. And Carly, what's your question for us today, Carly?
How are savings bonds taxed when I finally cash them in? I inherited them from my parents. Something tells me it won't be pretty.
Well, you might be right about that, Carly. That might not be pretty. Savings bonds are kind of funny. You know, if you had a stock that you had inherited from your parents and it grew from, say, $10 to $100,000 by the time you inherited it, had they sold it, they would have had to pay taxes on $999,990 in growth, right? But have you sold it after you inherited it, you actually would have received a step up to the basis and paid no taxes on any of those gains, because that's what happens when you inherit an investable asset like a stock. Even real estate works the same way. Now, on the other hand, you have savings bonds. Now, savings bonds are kind of a funny animal, because your parents could have chosen to pay those taxes every single year, or they could have deferred the taxes. Most people end up deferring those taxes, and when you inherit them, you don't receive a step up in basis. And so when you sell them, most likely you're going to end up paying a substantial amount of taxes. So I would suggest that you consult a tax advisor and make sure that you're getting a good idea of how much you're going to end up owing, and maybe even potentially sell those savings bonds over a matter of years in order to minimize the taxes that you end up paying.
Thanks, Carly, for your question. Let's see. We're going to bounce across the line to Paulding, Ohio, and Brenda is on the line. Brenda, go ahead.
Someone once told me there were 567 ways to collect Social Security. That sounds a little over-exaggerated, wouldn't you say?
Well, Brenda, I do think it sounds a little over-exaggerated. Are there 567 ways? Have there been 567 ways to draw Social Security? For a couple, yes, there have been that many different ways. Have I ever sat down with one individual and looked at all 567 ways that we could possibly take Social Security? Absolutely not. And there's very rare circumstances when we do. We'll sit down and you come into our office and we'll do a Social Security analysis showing you these are the different, and typically there's about 80 different ways that that we'll look at taking Social Security, not 567, but out of those 80 different ways, we'll probably only focus on 3 of those. One might be early retirement, or say 62, whenever you decide to step into retirement, and look at the cumulative amount of assets that we could collect in Social Security benefits. Then we might look at age 70, where we receive our maximum benefit, and compare those two along with maybe somewhat of a fancy strategy, which might mean filing with a restricted application or suspending, and that can get a little tricky. And so often, more often than not, I see people that are filing early, because even if you delay those benefits, you could potentially get more in income, but how much did it cost you in order to actually suspend those benefits or delay those benefits till a later date? And most people aren't willing to spend their own dollars that they 100% they know they have in their portfolio in hopes that the government does not change Social Security at some point in the future. So are there 567 ways? Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to file for Social Security. Is it something that you should get analyzed before retiring? Absolutely. It's probably a 7-figure benefit for the average couple, but don't overcomplicate things, and don't let anybody sell you on the reason that you have to come in and see them is because there's 600 different ways to file for Social Security and you need to be overwhelmed, because it's not all that complex once you actually sit down and run the numbers.
Thanks, Carly, or Brenda rather. Brenda, sorry about that. Jeff and Leo, go right ahead with your question for us.
Hi, this is Jeff. I would like to set up a college savings for my grandkids, but I'm not sure I like the strings that are attached to 529 savings accounts. Are there any other valid options out there?
Yeah, Jeff, I think there are other options that you could consider rather than using a 529. But there's not really anything wrong, especially if you have several different kids and using the 529 plan. I've got a 1-year-old and another one on the way, and we put our $5,000 every year into a 529 college choice savings plan. In the state of Indiana, you get a $1,000 tax credit for that, and that's pretty substantial. It's going to be difficult for that to be recaptured at some point in the future, and I bet one of the 2 kids that we have ends up needing college tuition at some point. So if you have a bunch of different kids, just keep in mind you can always reallocate the beneficiary, change the beneficiary. Now, I have met people that absolutely want to leave that behind to their children and maybe not even use it for college. And so they don't want one child to get skipped. And there are other options. I've got one couple that I worked with. They were grandparents and they were in their late 60s. They had 2 children that were just born. We wanted to put $5,000 a year away. We put $5,000 a year into an account. If they passed away, it would leave $110,000 tax-free to pay for college now, or they could pull $100,000 out once they reach the age of 18.
So lots of options there. We hope that you'll make the wise choice, and sometimes that involves getting the help of a professional, and that is the opportunity we have for you right now. For the next 10 callers, we dial 482-9559. Casey and the team at Howard Bailey Financial will sit down with you and offer a complimentary review of your entire financial and retirement plan. It's a chance to get an important education to understand all the options available for, well, as we've discussed today, healthcare, tax planning, college, retire, lots of different things. And that's something that you'll have after the meeting with the Howard Bailey team. So we hope you're one of the next 10 callers to dial 482-9559 and enjoy that complimentary review. Of course, we always invite you to contact us at info@howardbailey.com, or you can look us up online at howardbailey.com. We'll see you next week right here on The Purpose-Based Retirement.